With Boruto TBV Vortex Chapter 19, things have taken a turn for the worse, and if you're a fan of Konohamaru Sarutobi, it looks like that Sarutobi Riz God gene is skipped a generation, and as a result, it's going to get the guy killed now that Matsuri has realized he isn't in love with her, and this whole time she was nothing more than a sidekick and that Moegi was the real wifey. And as this is going on, Kashin Koji is sitting on the sideline going, this is a necessary sacrifice, and hopefully Konohamaru has some good life insurance policy as a Konoha shinobi. Jokes aside though, there's a lot going on in this chapter, so let's back things up and let's unpack the chapter itself. So we open up with a flashback that's explaining the origins of Araya's magna release jutsu sword and why it's so effective against Ryu. In short, the sword was made up of the chakra that belonged to Shinki, who used chakra control to imbue the sword with his own chakra for the purposes of combining Araya's wind release sword attacks with Shinki's chakra to allow him to use the iron sand on a comparable level as Shinki, which is pretty brilliant when you think about it in terms of what he's doing here. Shinki is shoring up the weaknesses of a comrade while also sharing his own power in the process. We also see a bit of a complex nature to their relationship in terms of more context, just like we saw with previously Araya and Yodo having that sibling-like relationship of bickering back and forth. Shinki and Araya, they have more of a healthy rivalry, with Shinki saying, think of him sharing his power with Araya like him giving himself a handicap whenever they spar with one another. The reason for this is basically to ensure they become capable enough shinobi to fight alongside Gaara, the Kazekage. But what's interesting here is that this close-knit group that Gaara took under his wing, they have more of a complex dynamic than we might have originally thought. So Araya tells Shinki that he should start paying more attention to Yodo, who just a few chapters ago asked Sarada if she had changed her look for a boy who Sarada liked, and now we see a flashback of Yodo being watched by Shinki and Araya from afar. She's got her hair let down, she's drawn in a feminine way, with both of them basically speaking about her, this time with Shinki pretty much saying that Araya has feelings for Yodo as well. Between the subtle hints that Yodo likes Shinki and Shinki's silence when he's watching Yodo, and Shinki calling out Araya on always talking about Yodo, and Araya having the constant bickering with Yodo, the prospect of there being unresolved feelings amongst this group is being sprinkled into the story. Very fitting, given one of the sub themes of this arc is about the nature of love itself and the way that it affects people in terms of their rationality, which that's going to be important to keep in mind as we go further into this chapter and the chapters ahead. So this brings us back to the present day, where Araya is battling against Ryu, this time by swinging his sword to release Mitsuki from the control of Ryu's iron sand, showing that the main power of the sword is indeed to serve as a counter to the iron sand attacks, making it a great equalizer against such a powerful enemy who was able to bully base code a few chapters ago, holding him hostage like he was a Disney princess waiting to be rescued. However, what you should be seeing here is that due to this matchup, they are having to rely way too much on that iron release sand sword, and one of the things that we learn in Naruto's manga is that you should never use your primary jutsu too much against an opponent, because they will eventually find a weakness to it or a way to counter it, and this sword is well on the path to fall on that fate. It's no different. Ryu has already begun to start clocking the powers of the sword, and he's starting to come up with countermeasures in real time to test it out. So the strategy that the team comes up with is to have Sarada and Mitsuki do all the heavy lifting in battle, which makes sense. They are the strongest out of that group, and Araya will provide support by taking care of the iron sand with the sword. And it goes unspoken that Yodo, her support role is to listen in with her highly sensitive ears, which can hear things down to the beating of the heart in order to alert them if there are any surprise attacks. This leads to Ryu mocking the plan that they have, saying that the group of shinobi, they are making a mistake by underestimating him. And as we all know, as battle shonen fans, anytime a villain's talking like this, they're definitely backing it up. And before they can react, he blasts off a huge barrage of iron sand and attempts to swarm them from a distance with the attack, but Araya's sword is able to cut through the attack and dispel the iron sand with ease, and this is where Boruto's manga starts taking us back in time to the traditional Naruto fighting method of the move hidden behind the move. Unlike Naruto, where characters would stop mid-fight and explain everything you just saw step by step. Boruto just expects you as a reader to be able to catch what's going on without explanation, because this is a sequel to said series. So Ryu's first attack was merely a distraction, meant to confirm the extent of how much volume Araya's sword could dispel, since the initial attack had more sand than the prior attacks, and while Araya dealt with the frontal attack, Ryu had secretly placed a secondary iron sand attack to come up from Araya's blind spot, but Yodo quickly alerts him to it in a seamless display of effective teamwork. This allows Ryu to confirm Yodo's abilities and her aptitude as a support shinobi, while Sarada and Mitsuki, they start trying to take advantage of Ryu's attention being on the two sand shinobi, but this, my friends, is where the damage has already been done. In only a few moves, Ryu gained critical intel and figured out the extent of the abilities of the two ninjas who are playing the support, or rather got a good grasp on their abilities. He's able to gauge how fast Araya can react to his attacks, how much iron sand he can cancel at one time, and he knows the accuracy of Yodo's abilities. Whether or not they're hiding anything else, he doesn't know right now, but he now has enough information to proceed in the way he needs to. The only thing that he doesn't truly know right now are the combat capabilities of the two Konoha shinobi, which means he still has the advantage because he gained a lot of critical intel without having to show his full power. Now, Sarada and Mitsuki, they now show that these sand siblings, they aren't the only ones who have good teamwork. Sarada shoots off a massive fireball jutsu at Ryu, who easily blocks it with his own iron sand, but they give Ryu a taste of his own medicine. Just as he set up a trap for Araya, Sarada and Mitsuki, they have set one up too, by having Mitsuki's snakes rise up from the ground to catch him off guard and ensnare Ryu, who was too focused on blocking himself from that high volume fire release jutsu that Sarada used. Realizing how dire the situation is and how good of a chance they have to get the upper hand, Mitsuki starts the fight out by using Sage Mode and continues to use the element of surprise by striking Ryu, who's being held in place by a second set of Sage Mode shadow snakes that are hitting. But Ryu basically breaks his entire body apart as iron sand, and he escapes the attack. And somewhere the I miss when this story is about ninjas doing ninja trickery crowd, they look like idiots. So the group quickly reforms by standing in a cross pattern, and they take in the information that they have. Now knowing that Ryu can break his body apart and become one with the iron sand, and Yodo, using those ears of hers, she's able to quickly pinpoint its location by listening to the sounds of the iron sand grinding together as Ryu is beginning to reform, which makes her every bit as valuable to this team as Araya. And we start seeing why Kashi and Koji specifically had Shikamaru assemble this team. They're learning to support each other in real time quickly. All of them have the right skill set that is working. Araya is taking this information and he uses the iron sand blade to force Ryu's body to reform itself and take away the element of surprise. And by doing so, he reveals to Ryu that this sword doesn't just cancel out iron sand, but it can gather it too, making it both a offensive and defensive attack. Now, Mitsuki wastes no time and he sees the target reforming and he shoots off another set of those Sage Mode energy snakes at Ryu, this time tearing into his body at multiple points and inflicting damage onto Ryu. But Mitsuki's attack, for as much damage as it did, it wasn't enough to fully take down Ryu, who starts breaking apart into iron sand again and attempts to go back into hiding. But this short exchange does give the Mitsuki fans something to wave their pom-poms about, because this upscales Mitsuki and it keeps him in line with what we previously saw when he fought Boruto, which is that Mitsuki was relative to a suppressed base Boruto, enough to make Boruto fight in a defensive manner, use jutsu in a defensive way, but he wasn't going at full power either. So not to be outdone, Sarada, she cuts on her 3-tomo Sharingan and she rushes forward with the Chidori and she blitzes Ryu as he starts to reform and she jabs him in the side with her attack. Now, this is really smart when you remember one crucial thing that we saw in the Boruto anime version of the versus Momoshiki arc, which is that Mitsuki's lightning release attack, it was briefly effective against Shinki's iron sand. Boruto's own lightning release was able to crack Shinki's iron sand, and when Boruto cheated by using purple lightning, he was able to generate enough of a volume of lightning release to outright break the iron sand altogether. Sarada is basically attempting to do the same thing with her Chidori. Since they saw Mitsuki's attacks, they didn't have enough weight to them to damage Ryu to the extent that they needed. So using Chidori's speed amp and the high volume of lightning release chakra for the thrusting jab is a smart idea here. We then shift over to Konohamaru and Matsuri, and this whole scene, it is overly emotional and it is childish, but it's good. And it's intentional to reflect one of the themes of this arc, which is love. If you look at the cut of Matsuri's clothes, in particular on her back, is shaped in a heart-shaped pattern. That's intentional and that's poetic. Now that we see her in this jealous rage of Konohamaru, Matsuri is losing it. She's cussing out Moegi for being the woman that Konohamaru loves, calling her a bitch and using another word to describe her that I can't say on YouTube because it'll get the video age restricted, but it starts with the letter S, and the chapter review editor should have it on the screen so you can see what I can't verbally say. So we then see the nature of their relationship spiraling even further as Matsuri becomes even more unhinged as she begins choking Konohamaru with the wood wrapped around his neck and cutting off his air. She's no longer calling him Konohamaru-chan, and she's referring to him not in the way of endearment like before, but solely by his last name, which shows that she is detaching herself emotionally from Konohamaru by not using the endearment phrase that is placed with his first name. If you know anything about Japanese culture, you know what I'm getting at here. So as this is going on, Ada watches everything with her Senrigan, and she's got those long legs of hers crossed, saying that Konohamaru is a dummy and how he fumbled this whole situation and his mission that Shikamaru gave him to exploit the feelings of love that Moegi has for Konohamaru that are fueling Matsuri and her actions. Ada correctly deduces that what Matsuri wants isn't just to call Konohamaru by the name Konohamaru-chan. She wants the symbolism and the relationship that comes from it. Basically, Shikamaru understood that, and he thought that Konohamaru understood it. He expected Konohamaru to use some riz to make Matsuri fall for him and lead her along to a point where she would have her guard lowered by his immaculate riz, and then he could shove a Rasengan in her back. But obviously, that plan, it backfired, and Ada has a front row seat to all of this, and she informs Koji of what's going on. Ada tells them that Konohamaru is likely to get killed, but as she's speaking, Boruto quickly demands to know how is Sarada doing against Ryu, and based on what Ada is saying, the fight, it is close enough that she cannot determine who's going to win right now, which is also her saying that the fight is close enough that they can't go help Konohamaru, and this leads to Boruto being stopped by Koji when Boruto tries to head to the battlefield with the unspoken reminder that Boruto can't act because if he does, Jura will show up on the battlefield and he'll kill him. It's basically the narrative forcing Boruto to sit on the sideline and allow his friends to show how much they've grown after 3 years of training. Now, for Boruto's character, this is a very important and I feel like underappreciated lesson by the fandom. So he's lost so much due to omnipotence, so it makes sense why he wants to protect those he cares for. But sometimes the best way to protect those that you love is to give them room to grow and not smother them. He filled his promise to Sasuke to look after Sarada by coming in when Code attacked the village, and then to save her when she was caught off guard by Hidari's lightning release attack and immobilized. Now, this is the time for her and Mitsuki to show the fruits of their training, which is what they're doing. At the end of part 1, right before Ada showed up in the village, they talked about how they wanted to be strong enough to assist Boruto get to an Otsutsuki level, and the only way they could do that is through the training they underwent, and they have to prove themselves right now to Boruto, who's being forced to watch all this. Boruto trusted in Sarada's power enough to have her buy time against Hidari and all those claw grinds when he was charging up his Rasengan Uzuhiko, but Boruto's also there on the battlefield. He's not there right now, and Boruto's learning a crucial element of teamwork is learning to trust in your teammates to take care of themselves. We then shift over to Jura, meeting with Bug and Hidari, and this whole conversation has so many layers to it. So each of them are by the cube that they use to transport themselves, and it is a sign that Koji's right. Had Boruto gone there, Jura would have been there on the battlefield within moments because of the cube. Jura's conversation is also a fascinating one because we see the knowledge he's gained from reading all these books and interacting with humans. We see him sharing this knowledge with Bug and Hidari because part of the arc for these awakened Shinju, particularly the ones who are made up of human chakra, so all of them except for Jura, is understanding what it means to be human and the meaning behind the type of love that each of them represents. And Jura has to put all these pieces together. He says that they should follow their instincts and focus on evolution because human beings aren't able to fully achieve their true evolution because there are drawbacks to them being in a society and forming bonds, and those bonds make them more aware of their own mortality as humans, because as a human, you only live for a certain number of years. At some point, we all die. Upon hearing this, Bug, he's completely checked out. He's like, man, this don't apply to me. I'm not a human. What do I care for? But the fact that Jura's saying this information to him means that it does. He's telling Bug that even the awakened Shinju, they run the risk of having the same weakness that humans have because they possess intelligence. The weakness of love, in particular, is what he's worried about. And as he's saying this, we see a shot of Hidari, who is made up of the chakra of Sasuke Uchiha, who is the father of Sarada Uchiha, a father who loves his daughter. Do with that information what you will, but you guys know my stance on the Sarada, Hidari, and Sasuke plot thread. I've done a video on that. We then shift back over to Matsuri reflecting Jura's warning that feelings of love can affect the Shinju as well, with her saying that Konohamaru and the feelings that she has for him, they're driving her insane, taking the phrase crazy in love to a whole new level, and she begins to start drawing herself in closer to Konohamaru, looking deep into his eyes, saying that she plans to eat him. Jura then tells the story of how he saw these feelings of love in the Ino Shikachou trio. Their love for Himawari as a comrade, it overrode their own survival instincts. They chose to protect her despite knowing they're facing an apex predator. And he singles out Inojin, losing himself in his desire to protect Himawari, and Jura can't fully understand what drove them to do that, which is why he's been reading so many books where he's seen repeatedly in multiple stories that humans, they don't act rationally when matters of the heart are in play. We saw that with Hinata saving Naruto, for example, and he can't fully understand it. What he does know is that they need to conquer these feelings inside of them as awakened Shinju when they do pop up, and that further builds on the foreshadowing that the yin release chakra of all the people who were bitten by the claw grimes and got made into awakened Shinju is going to be important, since yin release chakra is spiritual energy of a shinobi, and spiritual energy is tied to the heart, where feelings like love and anger reside. And we see that in how it's affecting Matsu in real time. And this is where the brilliance of this whole exchange really comes into play, but you got to go deeper beneath the surface to appreciate it. So it makes sense when you remember that Naruto and Boruto are heavily inspired by Buddhism, in particular the powers of the characters, and in this case the values that the characters hold. Jura is basically teaching the concept that shinobi and their attachments, in this case attachments in the form of bonds with comrades and lovers, and the attachments that shinobi have when it comes to feelings of love, it keeps them stuck into the suffered cycle of samsara, which is where all the six past powers and all the powers that came from Kaguya, which went to Hagoromo, which Hagoromo shared chakra with humans, that's where all that stuff is rooted in. And that is what is preventing these shinobi from being able to reach enlightenment, which is evolution as Jura calls it. And it's poetic that Jura is the one who is saying all this information, since Ishiki's karma seal is what Code used to make the awakened Shinju, and Ishiki possesses the eye patterned after the Dharma wheel, which is associated with transcending beyond samsara. In this case, transcending beyond Kaguya, the mother of chakra on Earth. However, getting back to the story, Matsuri isn't the only one being affected. So too are the human shinobi. They're stuck in that cycle as well. We're seeing it on display in a full circle moment that brings us back to the very start of the chapter and the feelings that Araya may or may not have for Yodo. The feelings of camaraderie that Jura said was a weakness of humans. We see them standing in a similar cross-shaped formation, looking around for Ryu, meaning that during this whole time, they still haven't been able to land a lasting blow on Ryu, and Araya is preparing his sword to force him to reform in the sky above him, but Ryu is one step ahead of them, and as he's reforming, he's producing the claw grimes from his body, in particular the clothing on his body that's made up from Code's claw marks. Several claw grimes, they start falling from the sky, continuing the same trend that we saw from before, where it's the move hidden behind the move. Ryu is now starting to use the element of surprise and the numbers advantage and the claw grimes hacks to his advantage. So Sarada and Mitsuki, their attacks, while they haven't been strong enough to stop him from reforming, they are strong enough to force him to use these methods of regenerating and hiding, meaning there is some form of relativity there. But the claw grimes, their main hacks that he's using comes from the fact that they have such a low win condition, whereas Sarada and Mitsuki have such a high win condition. Whereas all the shinobi have to completely destroy the claw grinds. All the claw grinds need to do is firmly bite into the shinobi and they win, which means the whole nature of this battle, it just changed from, say, moderate difficulty to god mode difficulty. Mitsuki, he then launches forward with several sage mode snakes to attack from a distance, and Sarada starts shooting off the fire style phoenix flower jutsu to take out more of the claw grinds from the sky. Both Sarada and Mitsuki are quickly realizing the importance of trimming down the number of claw grinds before they can land on the ground, because this is a battle where distance and close quarters, high-powered strikes will be their best friend, because if they get too close for too long, they'll be bitten by the claw grinds. However, Ryu, he just keeps spamming more of these claw grinds to the point where it's impossible to take them all down from a distance, and just when one of them begins to start biting Yodo, Araya swoops in to attack it from behind before it can firmly lock on and begin the tree conversion process like we saw in the past with the other shinobi. It's only in the process of biting her, but it hasn't firmly locked its teeth into her. However, what you should be paying attention to with this scene is that it's a difference in swordsmanship skills that are on display right now. Boruto is the better swordsman, and it's being shown right now. A master swordsman can cut through paper with one swing, and they can also, with the same swing, have enough skill to not cut through paper on the next swipe. Boruto easily cut through the claw grinds in chapter 2 with targeted sword slices without having any type of an amp. Yet Araya, whose sword is charged with Shinki's chakra, isn't able to fully cut through the claw grind that is biting into Yodo's body, but it does just enough to force the claw grind to stop biting Yodo and release her. And in the confusion, Ryu swoops in to take hold of the claw grind that has Araya's sword stuck inside of it. By forcing the claw grind that has the sword into the shoulder to retreat into the claw mark of another claw grind, Ryu has now taken the equalizer out of the equation. That magnet release sword that was giving Ryu so many problems is now gone, and Yodo, who could hear him being reformed, is now suddenly being surrounded by all the noise of the battlefield, and she is now injured. Ryu has basically removed two of the more troublesome pieces on the table, or at the very least, he's slowing them down. An act of love by Araya to save his comrade and potential crush in Yodo just cost them their greatest tool to keep the playing field even against Ryu, because he can now seemingly use his hacks in an unrestrained manner to take control of their bodies, in particular Mitsuki and Sarada. We then end the chapter off with Matsuri telling Konohamaru it is time for them to merge together, and unfortunately for him, the type of merging that she's got in mind, it isn't the type that answers the question of whether or not backshots being given to Matsuri will result in Konohamaru getting a splinter downstairs. She's going full-blown alien on Konohamaru, and she's about to devour him whole based on how this chapter's ended off. While that's going to be it for this video, don't forget to click here to check out the other Boruto 2 Blue Vortex chapter reviews, or click here to watch this video from my Anime Explained channel, where I discuss non-Naruto content in the form of video essays, lore videos, explain videos, chapter reviews, and so much more.